This has just told us a lot about the Memphis Grizzlies. Tony Allen and Rudy Gay and Zach Randolph were on the episode of Out the Mud, podcast hosted by Tony Allen and Zach Randolph, and they were talking about days of yesteryear, and specifically Rudy Gay's time in Memphis. And let's just say there were some interesting things said that we'll dive right into on this episode of Grizzlies Digest. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. I'm Tristan Harlen. Excited to be back with you. I know it's been a minute since I've been on the channel. Usually I kind of disappear for a minute, then come back. Jared, he does a great job of kind of filling the void while I'm gone. But I'm back. Happy Friday to everybody. Hope you had a great work week, great week in general, and you have a lot of plans going forward this weekend. Now, before we begin, of course, we can't do anything without talking about you subscribers. So, to my 37.7% of you guys, thank you so much for subscribing. To my 62.3%, you guys are going to want to click that subscribe button because the NBA season is right around the corner. There's a lot of things, that you're not going to want to miss when it comes to covering the Grizzlies right here on Grizzlies Digest. But go ahead and moving forward with the quote, and this was said on the podcast. With all due respect to that team, talking about the Miami Heat, they won a championship, but I don't think they could have beat us that year. That was our year. Rudy Gay speaks on it if he did traded in 2013 when the Grizzlies made the Western Conference Finals. Now, for those of you that are younger or wasn't watching the NBA back then or wasn't Grizzlies fans back then, maybe you were a part of the LeBron bandwagon or you were a fan of another team for whatever reason. Back in the day, the Grizzlies had a team, and I think everybody knows who they were. They were the grit and grind era Grizzlies, and they possibly would have been the best team in the Western Conference that year had they not lost to the Spurs in the 2013 Western Conference Finals where they got swept. Of course, in 2011, they made it, but I do believe they lost to the Clippers that year because they beat the Thunder, then they lost to the Clippers. Or maybe they beat the Clippers and lost to the Thunder. Anywho, in the 2011 season, I just forgot I had that bracket here. But okay, they beat the Spurs in 6, and then they went on to lose to the OKC Thunder in 7, and of course the Mavericks beat them in 5, and then they end up going on to beating the Heat in 6. But anyways, back to what I was saying. Of course, Rudy Gay gets injured in the 2011 season, is not available for this postseason with the Grizzlies, and then only 2 seasons later, he gets traded in a 3-team trade with the Raptors and Pistons back in the day that sent him to Toronto. Of course, the Grizzlies acquired Ed Davis, Jose Calderon, and they also sent backup center Hamid Hadid. If I'm saying that wrong, I do apologize. And then they turned around and got Tayshaun Prince, who then was on the Grizzlies roster for a minute, which is a little interesting tidbit that I wanted to bring up here, and that they were trying to get Vince Carter on the team, but the Mavericks weren't ready to give him up. But then eventually Vince Carter found his way to the grindhouse and played for the Grizzlies. Now, again, this all goes back to what they were talking about on their podcast. If you don't have had a chance to go check it out, make sure you go check it out. I love listening to their podcast, watching the podcast on YouTube, and make sure you're subscribing to them and subscribing to us here on Grizzlies Digest. But that brings up the question. Would the Grizzlies have won the championship in 2011 if Rudy Gay never gets injured? Now, we're talking about Rudy Gay. During that season, and my buddy just texted me, and I apologize for that if you heard my text tone. But talking about that season, Rudy Gay was averaging a pretty good amount of points there for a while, and of course, Rudy Gay, no secret to what he brought to the Grizzlies roster during that time. And, being a part of the Grizzlies roster for a good minute at that point really begs the question, would the Grizzlies have had a championship run had Rudy Gay not got injured, or if he would not have gotten traded? Now, if you ask me, I 100% think the Grizzlies would have won a championship in either 2011 or 2013. Now, a lot of people are going to disagree with me in the comments, and they're going to say, well, LeBron James was untouchable that year. It was bound to happen where he was going to win a championship with the Heat, talking about 2013. And then 2011 was just Dirk's year. Okay, I understand that, and I get that. But I think everybody can agree that 2011 Mavericks team possibly won, possibly had the greatest road to the finals that a lot of teams did not have. I mean, you go back and you look at it. First, they beat the Blazers in 6. Then they go on to sweep the Lakers. Now, remember, the Lakers were just coming off a championship after beating the Boston Celtics. And then they go on to beat the young Big Three at OKC. And then they go on to beat the Heat in 6. Now, the Heat, they had a road to the championship themselves. Of course, they beat the Celtics, they beat the Sixers, they beat the Celtics, they beat the Bulls, and then of course they go on to lose to the Heat. But let's talk about what this 2011 season was like for the Grizzlies. Now, not long before this season occurred, Tony Allen had just gotten to the team. Zach Randolph had just gotten to the team. Mike Conley was still young in the league, and they were still kind of finding their footing. So maybe not the 2011 season where the Grizzlies gonna possibly make it all the win the entire thing, but definitely in 2013 is the year that would have been best, because you had Mike Conley playing at an all-time high, Tony Allen playing at an all-time high, of course Rudy Gay prior to the trade, Marc Gasol. I mean, this Grizzlies team was arguably the best team that the Grizzlies have had in franchise history. Now, what does Rudy Gay add to that team, you may ask? Well, you got to remember, this is a team in this bracket that got swept by the Spurs. The Spurs, who ended up, I believe they lost to the Heat this year in 2013, and then they ended up winning it back in 2014. But you go on and you look and you say, okay, yeah, that's great, and yeah, that's good, but what exactly are you trying to say here? And what I'm trying to say is this, going back to the quote, Rudy Gay is 100% factual. I mean, if you're going to sit here and you're going to tell me the Grizzlies would not have won a championship between the span of 2011 to 2013 with Rudy Gay on the roster, he's healthy and, he's playing to the level that he's playing to, then quite frankly, you're just wrong. Because Rudy Gay, and you can Google this if you don't believe me, against LeBron James during that season, he had a game where he dropped 40. Or maybe not that season, but he had dropped 40 maybe a couple seasons prior when LeBron first got to the Heat. But Rudy Gay also mentioned in the podcast that he was wanting to test himself against the best of the best. And, I think I could speak on this with a very good mindset on it, that the Grizzlies had their perfect opportunity to win the championship in 2013. Now, again, things happen. Guys get traded. Teams get shaken up. I mean, we've seen this before with the Grizzlies. I mean, you saw it here. You saw it quite recently when Tyus Jones and all these guys disappeared from the Grizzlies. But I definitely feel that the Grizzlies would have won the 2013 championship had Rudy Gay not gotten traded. But here's the funny part. If you ask my best friend who's a Miami Heat fan, he'd tell you that the Heat would have swept the Grizzlies. Now, again, that's then. Today's today. Yesterday was yesterday. You'll never get the past back, and you always got to live in the present. That's why it's called the present. But, I don't know. I just think that from a grand scheme of things, I definitely think that the Grizzlies would have won a championship in 2013. Now, again, let me know what you think in the comments. But while we're here, I want to ask this question, and I want to hear your thoughts in the comments for this as well. You take a 7-game series. You take Mike Conley, Tony Allen, Rudy Gay, Marc Gasol, and a power forward of your choice. It could be Ed Davis. It could be whoever you want to put at that 4 position. Versus today's Grizzlies. Now, when I say today's Grizzlies, I mean John Morant, Desmond Bane, a small forward of your choice, Jaren, and you know what? We'll throw Steven Adams in the mix for ha-has and funnies. Who do you think wins the best of 7? The current day Grizzlies or the grit and grind era Grizzlies? Now, I know a lot of people have talked about this on Twitter, also known as X, but again, just let me know what you think on that in the comment section below. But guys, hope you've enjoyed this episode of Grizzlies Digest. Not going to run long here because I have another video I have planned for today. Hopefully nothing comes up. But again, guys, make sure you're clicking that subscribe button down below, liking the video, commenting what you think, and sharing this video with a friend. But anyways, guys, this has been another episode of Grizzlies Digest. Tristan Harlen signing off and saying goodbye. I'll see you guys again very shortly.